She's pressing. Okay, so I'm just going to give it 1 minute because we're not quite on 12 yet, just to allow people to start accessing from there. But we've got people flying in now, which is great news. Welcome everybody. Great to see so many people registered on here today. So we're very excited to have you all and to spend the next hour talking to these two wonderful humans, which I'm going to introduce to you very shortly. I can see some of our Fabric alumni are here today, which is great. And we've got a huge range of the current Fabric cohort here, but a big welcome to those and a massive welcome to anybody who doesn't currently know us or is completely new to Fabric or our Level Up series, of which we're now in webinar 2 of 5. So we're not quite partway through yet. So just very quickly before we get stuck into today's content, for those of you who don't know me or aren't part of our community currently, I am Lisa, founder of Fabric Academy and Unwritten Group. We built Fabric almost 2 years ago now, which has flown over. It's gone in the blink of an eye. But our sole purpose was to help empower marketers to thrive. And our plan has been always to provide value, support, knowledge, stories, learnings, failures, everything in between, to help marketers progress in their career and become the very best at what they do. And so this series is exactly that. The Level Up series is filled with advice, support, tips, knowledge, techniques, and of course it's from the very best of the best, which leads me nicely into our intros for today's webinar, because we've got not just one, but 2 incredible guests here today, which is the first time for us at Fabric, who are both dedicated to helping marketers find their place. So we have the awesome Jo Glover, who is the founder of the Marketing Meetup, and we have the incredible Sophie Miller, who is founder of Pretty Little Marketers. And honestly, just before I formally introduce these two, over the last 18 months, these 2 communities have been nothing short of incredible for essentially the same reason, although they have very different styles. But just knowing that you're not out there alone, for sharing the most amazing knowledge, for just the energy and the positivity and the just incredible, inspiring people that, you know, these guys talk to constantly. So if you haven't checked out the Marketing Meetup or Pretty Little Marketers yet, definitely do so after this webinar. So I'm going to start with Jo and just tell you a little bit about Jo before he does himself. But formerly the Marketing Meetup was started by Jo about 5 years ago now, and has since grown to a community of over 23,000 marketers. Jo, by his own admission, was always a little bit terrified to walk into a networking situation because they were all a little bit stuffy and quite formal. And so as a hobby, Jo set out to create a space where everybody could feel really comfortable, very included, and generally just a nice group of people to be part of and be around. And so essentially the Marketing Meetup was born from there. Obviously this was going on before the pandemic, and it was essentially in-person meets, right? And the pandemic meant that Jo had to completely switch, as we all did, and move all of these events online, but has done the most amazing job with that. And in 2020 alone had some of the most incredible guests. Most of you will be marketers on here today, so you will know these names, but Mark Ritson, Rory Sutherland, and some of the world's best known marketers. So all amazing stuff. And then just on to Sophie. It's not actually that dissimilar, your story, Sophie. So as a university student, Sophie couldn't find the resources support that she needed online. So in June, set up Pretty Little Marketers, which was a community to help students, graduates, and those at the start of their marketing career really find their feet, find their voice, give them confidence and support. PLM is now a collective of over 60,000 marketers across various different socials, and is one that is definitely here to stay and a really great one to be part of. So check these out. If you're in marketing, honestly, two of the best communities to be part of. Couldn't speak more highly of them. And that's not because they're here today. That's truly what I believe. So today we're going to be sharing all their tips, their advice, their stories, their learnings, everything that they can share with you in our next half an hour on building and scaling an engaged community and how to provide genuine value to those who need it most. So we're going to be talking for the next 30 minutes or so. The Q&A is open. So by all means, start popping your questions in the Q&A as we go. And once we've finished our first chat, I'm going to open to questions and try and get as many of those answered for you as possible. So before we start formally with the questions, a big welcome to you both. If you wouldn't mind, and I haven't stole any of your thunder there too much, Sophie, I'm just going to pass over to you to just do a little intro.
Of course. Lisa, I think those are some of the nicest things anyone has ever said about me. My head is very quickly growing from all of the love. So thank you so much. But hi, everybody. I'm Sophie. I started and founded Pretty Little Marketer. And outside of PLM, I'm a freelance social media marketer. So lots going on in my little world. Outside of PLM and freelancing, I've also just graduated and finished a degree in marketing. So lots and lots going on. But where my heart and where my brain always is PLM, thinking about how we can, help our community and use my own story to benefit others. Before university, I worked in corporate events coordination, which, although a fancy name, was the most horrific job you can imagine. I spent a lot of time with people who weren't very nice. I would eat lunch all by myself in my car. So I understand the struggles of my community when it comes to this is where I want to be, but I have no idea how to get there. So one day, I'd had enough, applied to university, somehow got accepted into university 3 years after finishing school, went to university, and now here I am. So my journey has been here, there, and everywhere. But my main aim is just to help others who felt like I did then, find what their dreams are and give the actionable steps on how to get there. And if I could describe PLM in one nutshell, it would be exactly that. So yeah, a really good time now that we've kind of found what we love, and PLM is the love of my life, not to be dramatic. So yeah, in a nutshell, I would say that is me and where I've been and what I'm up to.
Thank you, Sophie. That's amazing. And I think that sums it up perfectly. PLM is the love of your life. That comes through in everything you do. So yeah, thank you for that. And Joe, we'll just pass over to you.
What an introduction there, Sophie. That was amazing. I feel like I'm sat next to some sort of like angelic figure. So like coming up next is that's a tough act to follow. But so very, very similar. It's remarkable the amount of similarities that sort of come through, and I guess that probably comes through the motivation to sort of keep going with community definitely comes from having the experience of not necessarily coming from a positive place. So the place that I came from was that fear of walking into those networking scenarios and sort of feeling like an outsider, was a desire to learn about marketing and become a better marketer, but also to connect with people in a way that sort of felt real and human and kind. So with all those things, when that space didn't necessarily exist, then I looked to create it. And it's interesting to hear Sophie's story, which, it would appear from the outside, at least, definitely started online. We started in person and has since shifted online. So in the past year, I was definitely focused there. And so our webinars have grown, and the community has grown with it. And it's been just the most insane experience. But definitely to speak about that word, love, I think that's a really important thing, and certainly when we speak about community as well. You can't always control how people are gonna receive your message, but you can certainly put a lot of love into it. And it's wicked to hear Sophie speaking about that too, because I think that's probably a big takeaway for me in terms of building communities is that sort of loving aspect. So the marketing meetup, likewise, a labour of love, but I'm fortunate that it's also a community where people put that best foot forward and come with that mindset in mind too.
Yeah, and thank you, Joe. And I think that's so very true of what you both have in common, because styles are quite different, but you can tell that you guys absolutely love what you do. You know, this isn't a job. I sometimes feel like it on the other side, but it never feels like that from being part of the community. It really does feel like you're genuinely there because you love what you do and you just want to share that with everybody. So amazing, amazing. Okay, so we're going to start with some questions here. And I guess the main thing that we're here today to talk about is building and scaling a community, which is so important these days for individuals, for communities, essentially just to stay connected. Um, and you've both done this through the most insane of times, what we might say is the most difficult of times. But you've managed to really embrace that and bring communities forward and just really help and support those people along the way. So, Joe, let's start with you. What advice would you give to somebody who's looking to build a community and they're just starting out?
So I'm not very good at giving advice. I'm good at sharing experiences. So I'm happy to share experiences. And really, I think it probably comes down to a few things. And hopefully Sophie would sort of have a similar experience here as well. So the first is that loving point. It's got to be creative with looking to help other people. First and foremost, you know, a community, you know, it's good to define up front, is a place where, for me at least, is where people come together to make each other stronger than they would be by themselves, to lift each other up and create something where the impact could be far greater than a single person's efforts. So this is a place where people come together and look to help each other first. And with that in mind, then the first bit of experience that I've had is that you've got to be the example of that. You've got to come in and you've got to be the person that is looking to help people in all scenarios. You've got to genuinely care about people. And this is kind of one of my gripes with the word community right now, is sort of been turned into like a marketing tactic. And really, it's not that at all. You know, it's got to be a human experience where people come together and to elevate one another. After that point, sure, you know, build a business off the back of it, you know, but do it in a way that feels meaningful. So my first sort of experience is that you have to come with that best foot forward, that sort of loving intent, that sort of whatever it is to look to elevate those around you. So that would be the first thing. The second would probably be that it's going to take a lot of time. Sophie, your experience of getting to where you are in a year is phenomenal, you know, and I both listened to that. Well, I listened to it mostly with just complete admiration. And in fact, you know, my journey's been slightly different in that it's taken 5 years to get to the point where we are, where this momentum is behind the group in the way that it is. And that wouldn't have happened without consistent effort, without turning up day in, day out, looking to help people in a consistent shape, consistent form, and sort of that consistency element. So I would say that you don't give up on community just because you aren't getting that traction on day one. That would be the next thing. And then, I don't know, I did preface this by saying there's three things, but that's the danger of always starting an answer with three things, right? That you then have to find the third. And there's a bunch, you know, but I think fundamentally one of the things that we morphed into at one point was like thinking we were an events company. So the marketing meetup at the beginning of 2020 had 140 events planned across the world. When COVID came, you know, it killed it all off. And with that thought in mind, you have to go back to that thought of, again, let's focus on community, the real spirit of community, and actually realize that the thing that you do, the tactics that you use to get out into the world, they're not actually the spirit of community. You have to always take it back to that sort of foundational element. So those would be three main things. You know, sort of defining community is going to take some time, and also, you know, never forget why you're doing what you're doing.
Yeah, and I think that's great advice, especially around the patient side, because I think people think this can happen really quickly and easily, and you know, expectations are high because reach is now so easy, but you know, that genuine loyalty and that engagement is definitely not an overnight success, although Sophie seems to have somehow managed to make it an overnight success. So from your side, Sophie, what's the secret? What have you been doing?
I absolutely love your 2/3 top tips, Jill. And I completely agree what you said about community building being shifted into this sort of tactic. When I'm in meetings at work, or whenever I talk with my clients, like big corporations, about our followers, we always use the word community rather than followers. And kind of this shift into corporate communities definitely takes the love and I think the heart out of it. So for me, I too have 3 bits of advice that I would give. And number 1 would be motivation. So similar to like these big corporations wanting to build communities or followings because, they want to sell or they want to grow. I think when you're doing it out of love and you're genuinely just trying to help people, that motivation is really important. I think it's great to have like metric goals, like, okay, in this year, I want to grow and I want my Instagram to be at X amount of followers. But I think what drives you has to be, okay, well, actually those followers and behind every number is a person. And it's not about gaining numbers, it's about helping people. So I think number 1 would be motivation and really clearly defining that at the beginning of your journey. So for me, when I set up PLM, I came up with a tagline, which is to inform and inspire you to achieve your career dreams. So that is my sole motivation, whether we have 10 followers, 10 million, that's the motivation and that's the goal. Number 2 would be, it is hard work. I started PLM as a 2nd year student and, life was good then. But I then transitioned into a 3rd year student and 3rd year is not easy. And then alongside that, I was then a 3rd year student, community owner, and then like a full-time job worker. And it could be really easy for PLM to be last on my list and get swallowed up in other things. So prioritizing what you do because you love it, and recognizing and telling yourself, reminding yourself that it's going to be hard work. Communities don't build overnight, is completely true. So number 2 would be that it really is hard work. And then the final one is to be authentic and just be you. In the last year, everything has shifted online and our interactions with people have been minimal. I would say in the past 16 months, I've probably been in like personal contact with about 10 people, which isn't many, and it can be really difficult to build those personal connections. And we're fortunate enough to have this online space that is free and we can use it to show who we are and show our personality and inspire others. So pour what you love and who you are into everything you do. And I think it's always people that attract people. So yeah, being you, recognizing it's hard work and having a real clear and genuine motivation, I think are the 3 tips I would give if you're just starting out.
Amazing advice. Yeah, that's so useful. And I think so honest and so good to be able to give people that ground. And if they're just starting out with, particularly if there is some preconceptions about, this is an easy option, this is a quick option, this is a quick win, it's not like that. And it's really obvious that you two both have such similar values at heart, and authenticity and genuine passion for what you do is absolutely, definitely what drives your communities and makes them so successful. And it shines through with you both, it really does. How important is to have that genuine purpose when building a community? What about the people who don't really know what they're doing it for or in it for the wrong reason? Sophie, what's your take on that?
Yeah, I think it's probably for me the most important thing. I think we all follow, like for me, I follow a lot of fashion influencers, for example, and it's really clear who does that because they have a passion for the industry and they just love trying new things and inspiring people. And the people who recognize that followers equal money. And I think your community, they're not stupid. They know, we can read people and we can read people even easier online. So I think being genuine and having a real purpose is absolutely key. For me, when I started PLM, I asked myself, like, okay, what is the point in this, and what do I want to achieve? So I think going back to like just starting out, or if you have already started a brand community and you're a bit like, okay, well, what am I doing? Where is this going? Considering like, okay, well, like stripping it back, what is the actual point in this, and what do I want to achieve? Whether it is to entertain people, to inform people, to educate people, what is your end goal and how are you going to get there? So I think that is strategy involved in achieving those goals and defining that motivation and defining that purpose. But yeah, doing it because you love it and being genuine about what you're doing, I think is absolutely key. Because yeah, people, we can tell, we know.
Great. Joe, anything to add from that from your side?
Yeah, I think there's two. I think the first is that it comes through in your communications at all points, so we use email quite heavily. So I know that Sophie's like really hot and social, and actually that's a gap for us in a way, but email for us is actually something that's really, really cool, and something that we get a lot of the time is people saying, oh, we don't get emails like that from anyone else, and the reason is because you write an email as if you're writing to a mate, and that can only come from a place of like genuine personality, authenticity, and sort of a human being writing for another bunch of human beings. So to directly answer your question, yeah, it's absolutely vital. You can't pretend to be a brand or whatever, because you lose that humanity, and humanity is at the core of community. So yeah, I think that's the first point. And then the second is that your motivation can change over the course of time as well. So when I started the marketing 5 years ago, it was simply an exercise. It was a hobby to bring together people. I hadn't defined it. I hadn't actually done the exercise which Sophie had done. I just kind of did a thing, and sort of like it felt right, and it was authentic to me and my values. So I guess here we're actually identifying something that was really important, right? That it was almost intuitive. The community was intuitively in the shape of that authenticity. So there wasn't really a need to define it up front. But over the course of time, I found that the reason why I was doing things was changing. I myself was becoming quite confident. I was able to walk into a room and sort of say hello to people. I was able to, sort of stand at the front of a room and sort of present and stuff like that. So no longer the motivation was like, it's shy Joe stood in the corner. It was like, okay, the motivation needs to change it. So, about 3 years into the process, then it became very, very apparent that the thing that sort of makes the hairs on my arms sort of stand up is helping people. That moment when people came up to me and sort of said, you helped me. And like when they walk up to you and say, you helped me, that was enough. That was great. That was paying off the 2 hours either way for travel to run an event for free in the evening. That was fine. But then even then there was another progression, which was, in my own journey, which is that I'm now 5 years into this process, and I'm thinking about, well, how can we build long-term change? How can we help people on a meaningful level? Just not just a surface level, but like really only change 1% of the core of a person. But if they're a little bit kinder as a result of interacting with a marketing meetup, then like that feels like a really, really good thing to do. So what we see there is like a progression of motivation and change. And so, to come back to the final point, which is like, sure, know why you're doing stuff in that moment, but also give yourself the freedom to sort of change that over the course of time, and realize that your motivation will change. And it's okay, because I battled with this a lot, was like, actually, I'm not the same person I was a year ago. And you know what? This community still has the shape of what I need it to be able to fulfill all these different goals. So yes, be authentic in the moment, but then also realize that can change over the course of time.
Yeah. And I guess, sometimes the community's needs can change, as we've all gone through this pandemic over the last year, everybody's needs has changed in some way, shape or form. So it's, I guess, also having that freedom to be able to develop, to make sure you're still delivering what your community need, and not just you set on this path of this is what I'm going to deliver, and then it becomes, it becomes irrelevant. I mean, you've both had incredible levels of engagement in your community. So as you've said before, it's not just about gaining numbers or followers. It's about genuinely knowing people are out there engaging with you, asking questions, that feedback, Joe. I mean, you almost made the hair stand up on my arm there when you talked about somebody coming up and just saying, you know, you helped me. That is what's important. That's what's truly, you know, brilliant and special about the community. But that's not easy, you know, is it? It's a tricky thing to make sure you still have. And I guess, Joe, particularly for you, over 5 years, you know, keeping people engaged is tough, and it's tricky, you know, what's the right thing to get that engagement. I mean, how do you do that? How do you go about doing that? Is it gut feel? Is it planned?
It's definitely not planned. It is a lot of gut feel. It sort of goes back to much of the points that we've been making here about sort of genuinely caring. I think, you know, I said it at the beginning. You can't control how people are going to receive your message, but if you put it in with a bunch of love, then you're far more likely to receive it back. And I think that's true, you know, over any period of time. You know, if those moments where you truly look to help people were those moments also where there was that spike in engagement. So, you know, I think you've got that element of it. I think there's also a secondary element, which is like, you've also just got to do good stuff. And I know that sounds, you know, sort of like it's kind of off track for a lot of the conversation we've had so far. But, you know, there will be, when you're speaking about the numbers that Sophie and I are speaking, there'll be a lot of people who are just there purely for the functional stuff. You know, I'm here to learn, you know, and therefore, you know, whenever we do a webinar, I'm making sure it's the best webinar that, you know, I can put on, you know, when I do whatever, you know, we're finding the best guests and stuff like that. So there's a lot to be said for, you know, a consistent effort in terms of love, but then there's also a consistent effort in terms of quality. And, you know, that's acknowledging that your audience is going to be made up of a ton of different people with a ton of different motivations. So all you can do is you can control what you can control, make it input with love, input with quality, and, you know, hope that it turns out. And I mean, it's not a mad formula, but it does. And then the only last thing to add to that is that momentum then really does get behind you. To give an example, the quality was really, really high this time last year, but we're now doing double or triple the numbers that we were, you know, this time last year. And that's because, you know, of that sort of consistent effort. So consistent kindness, consistent quality. There you are. I think that seems to be it.
Definitely add to that list for you, Joe, is consistent positivity, because I have been a lover of your email for a long time, and I do not like emails at all. I don't like e-newsletters. I'm not a big fan of them. I tend to just ditch them all. But yours is truly one that I just look forward to, because it's so interesting and funny and quirky and full of knowledge, but just turns your day around if you're having a bit of a rough morning. And you know, it's that type of thing that keeps people coming back to your newsletter time and time again. So you do a fantastic job with that. Sophie, in terms of, I guess, your community, you know, we've just talked a couple of times there about how you scaled it so amazingly fast. How did you do it? And not kind of why or what advice you would give, but physically, how did you do that at such a fast rate?
I have no idea. No, I'm kidding. But there's been like so much trial and error. So PLM is really my first and biggest example of social media experience. So before starting PLM, I didn't really know what I was doing, and it's been a lot of me learning as I go. I think the biggest factor as to how PLM has grown so quickly and attracted so many is similar to what Joe was saying about quality, ensuring that my content and what I'm putting out is something that stands out. For example, if you hop onto the PLM Instagram, you might see a couple of CV tips. Now, if you typed into Google CV tips, hundreds of millions of results will come up. I haven't invented CVs. A lot of the tips you've probably heard before, but it's about finding ways that are different and make it stand out. So for me, I ensure that all of my content is really actionable. So I'm not just giving you a tip, I'm sharing, okay, this is what I've done, this is the outcome, and this is what you can learn from it, and which I think is really unique. And a lot of websites or Instagram pages that I follow kind of lack that. So yeah, finding new ways that I can stand out in my niche and make PLM something really different, I think is what attracts people to it. And then on top of that, similar to what we've said about personality and how that makes something authentic, one of my favorite quotes, and I have no idea where it's from, is that people will forget what you say, but they will never forget how you make them feel. So using my platform to inspire people or encourage them, or like you were saying, Lisa, with the marketing meetup emails, they make your day a bit better. And that's what you attach to that brand and that community. And that's the perception of them that you then have. So making sure that PLM as a whole and everything I do kind of empowers, inspires, because people don't forget that. They don't forget how you make them feel. So yeah, number one would be kind of standing out, doing things that really make my brand and my community different. And number two would be making people feel great.
Great, that's brilliant, really good advice. And I guess that's what we love from you, Sophie, the not just the advice but the how to, which is sometimes when you're starting out, what you really, you know what you want to do, but it's almost, how do you get there? How do I move this into an action? So that's brilliant. And just talking there, Joe, your video that you play at the start of every webinar has become almost a household trait in our, I will often catch up on a webinar when I'm getting ready in the morning, and the kids now do the moves from the videos, they sing the tune. So you are embedded in our lives in a really strange way. From being other side of a computer screen, you really can get that personal effect right into people's lives. So
it's amazing. I love that, and actually, that actually speaks to something, which is those little moments of magic. So like our creative guy, Baz, put that video together, and I was like quite doubtful about it. I was like, well, it seems like a lot of effort, and I had to go out and find people to dance in it and stuff like that, and I felt really shy about asking people to do that. I didn't think anyone would want to do it. But you're right, it was a little moment of magic, and every week now there's comments at the beginning of the webinar like, it's the music, and stuff like that. So you're spot on, but there was no way to sort of derive, and this sort of ties into the scaling conversation that we're going on here as well. There was no way to derive like, there's going to be a massive ROI on that video. There's no way to tangibly sort of define that, but you get feedback like that all the time, and you're like, yeah, that was a moment of magic, and it was definitely worth it. And like, I think finding those moments of magic, are so important. And we've often seen a little spike whenever you put them together. So this time last year when COVID stuff was going on, and well, still is, but like it was really kicking off. And you remember everyone was doing like those videos where like they were saying, we really care about you and stuff like that. And then, it was quite clear that these big corporates didn't care. But, we did a version of that, but got Sean Paul to do it, and just got like him to do a cameo video for us and stuff like that. And like people like, I've never seen my inbox so full of just like people saying, I really needed that. And again, it was just like a little moment of like stupidness, but also amazing sort of fun that sort of speaks to humanity and sort of having a lot of fun. So yeah, community is built on magic as much as it is built on effort and humanity.
Completely. And I guess, one outcome for everybody who's building a community has to be just make people happy, make people feel positive, make people inspired. And if you've got that momentum in mind, it will definitely come through, I'm sure. So just talking on the opposite side now, because when you open yourself up to building a community, obviously what you're looking for is lots of engagement, and what you're hoping for is lots of positive engagement, but there will inevitably be the people who don't like what you're doing. Joe, I know we've talked before about that, some people, that your tone of a newsletter isn't for them, negative criticism, and people are pretty forthcoming sometimes with negative comments on social. Sophie, how have you dealt with that? Have you experienced it, and have you had to deal with it?
Sadly, yes, I have had to deal with it. I think there's like this notion, I suppose, of, if you put yourself out there online, you're inviting people to say what they want. And sometimes that can be great, but sometimes it can be really tricky. I think especially when I was just in my second year starting out, I was just posting on my little Instagram, hoping for the best. And you'd get comments from like maybe more experienced people in recruitment, like, this is incorrect, or why would you give such awful advice? And it can be really easy to take it really personally, which then I think I did. Now I feel like I've built a bit of resilience. We might get a comment on LinkedIn saying, oh, why would you post this? Like, this isn't very good. But okay, well, what's their experience? What can we take from this? Can we reach out and ask, hey, like, I saw your comment. I understand that perhaps you don't agree with the advice that I'm giving. What would you say instead? Like, make it into a conversation. Something that my mum drilled into me from a very early age is that every opportunity is a learning opportunity. So whether that was me sat on the stairs upset because I tried to eat too much cereal, or now if I do receive, like a lack of engagement or a negative comment or someone disagreeing with what I'm saying, okay, well, what can we learn from this? But it is easier said than done, isn't it? Not letting things get to you and affect you personally. There have been times where I have sat and I physically cried because someone sent a DM and it's not too kind, or there's been a comment, or I put my heart and soul into a piece of content and it hasn't been seen by anyone. So I think that is that reality that it is difficult. So on, I guess, like a mental and practical level, getting people around you that understand. I'm sure if I spoke to my dad about how upset I was about an Instagram comment, he wouldn't get it, and he might not be able to comfort me because, there's just this gap where he doesn't understand. But I have friends in the social space who will understand that. So recognizing who you can lean on and who can support you if, you are getting feedback that you're struggling with, I think is really important. But yeah, not taking it personally and taking it as a learning opportunity is on the positive side. And then if you are struggling, find really good people that can support you and talk about it with.
That's great advice, and so true and honest. What about you, Joe? Any real negativity that you've had to deal with, and how?
Yeah, it hurts. It really hurts. Because we've spoken about putting love into something, and if you care deeply about something and then someone comes back and says, you're wrong, or that's horrible, then it hurts, and there's no getting away from that. And so I was speaking with someone the other day, who sort of described it as 95%, we'll sort of ping off, and then 5% will get through. And I think actually for me, it's probably far more like 50-50, to be honest. There's probably quite a lot more that gets through than doesn't, or, that there's probably an equal amount for sure. The one thing I would say is it's just a muscle that you build up, over the course of time. You get used to it. And I do agree with Sophie to a large extent, which is that there's usually an opportunity to learn stuff. I think sometimes also, though, there's these moments where you're just like, you know what, I've done it for the best reasons, and if you're going to take it that way, then that's okay, but actually that's on you. Because and it's an unnatural thing for me to say that, but I often put things on myself, so like, we're not performing well. Well, what can I do about it? It's a barbecue this weekend. Okay, what can I do to make it special? It doesn't really matter what it is, but there's those things which are like very personal responsibilities. But sometimes you got to realize that you're crafting a message, you're doing something for a lot of people, and in Sophie's case, you might get one bad message back, but you got 39,999 people who are like, you know what, this is really great. So there's no avoiding it, but I don't think that's a reason to stop. I don't think, because I think that if you're helping the people and got the conviction that you're helping them in the best way you can, then, and all other signs seem to be good, then you can't let it kill you. As hard as it is, because even 2 weeks ago, I had a thing which ruined my entire weekend, an email chain which ruined my entire weekend. And so it's just a learning process, and you just got to make peace with it, but don't let it stop you.
Yeah, and that's really interesting, and it's good to hear that even the most successful of the communities have that. There is always people out there who want to ruin somebody's day, don't have the best intentions, we can't get away from that. But it's good to know that, I guess, for people who are thinking about building a community, you might be worrying about that. Even the most successful and most loved communities do still have that, and some great advice there in terms of how to deal with it. Okay, last question from me, and then we're going to open to everybody else's questions, because I can see them starting to pile in there now. So do start popping questions in there. We're going to start answering those in a couple of minutes. But just something I was interested in from my perspective is that both of your communities not only love you guys and the speakers that you bring on and the help and support that you give, but they really help each other. There's this really kind of drive to support other marketers, to really what you've built has definitely come all the way through that community, and there is that real genuine passion to help others within the community. Is that something that you've both actively encouraged and had a plan to do, or has that just organically happened in your groups? Sophie, what about you?
For me, the first kind of thing that pops to mind is the quote that goes, "Your vibe attracts your tribe." And I think when you're putting out good things into the world and people see who you are, then you attract those types of people. So much so that in our Pro-Digital Marketers Facebook group, whenever I see, like, hey, I have a task for an interview, can anyone help me? Or posts saying they're struggling to get a job and people share their own experiences. I've been so moved. I have cried. I've literally sat on my sofa and cried because I just think it's so amazing. I think for me, I spend a lot of time online. And with that, I guess sometimes you can see the worst of people, like criticism here and there, or spending time on Facebook and looking at any comments on any tabloid post ever. And then to, enter these Facebook groups where there are just people who are willing to spend 5 minutes adding a comment that are really going to help someone. It brings me joy to see that there are still so many wonderful people out there. But yeah, I guess in a really short answer, it is exactly that. Your vibe attracts your tribe. And when you're putting great things out there, then you'll only, fingers crossed, attract those back. And yeah, so yeah.
I love that. That's really cool. I really like that. Joe, what about you?
Yeah, spot on. There isn't an awful lot I can add to that answer. The only thing I can add is really that's the definition of community right there, right? That's the difference between a broadcast and a community, is that people are helping each other beyond just sort of receiving messages from a central hub and then sort of saying, here's this thing, go and do this type of thing. It is people looking to help each other beyond just the person sat in the middle. And on a far more tactical level for folks looking to start their own communities, then it's really worth giving a lot of thought to how people can do that. How people can support each other. Like Sophie, we've got a Facebook group, and found that to be quite a good mechanism for allowing folks to interact with each other beyond our events. But then also give thought to like very, very simple mechanisms. So stuff like the chat feature, for example. We run our webinars on Zoom, and the chat feature is alive every week with people, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of comments, and people looking after each other, like finding each other jobs, arranging walks and all that sort of stuff. So there's a little tip there, which is definitely sort of give consideration to how folks can interact beyond just sort of receiving your messages too.
Great. Excellent. Okay, well, that was amazing, as I completely imagined it would be, and so full of useful advice for everybody. But we've got some questions, so I'm going to start to rattle through these to see if we can get them all answered before we run out of time. If we don't get to your question, and it's in the Q&A and we cut off at 1 o'clock as planned, then please do reach out on socials to either us at Fabric or to Sophie or to Joe directly on their socials. We will all do our very best to answer any questions that you've got. So don't be afraid if we don't get to your questions, to reach out after this webinar. We're also going to send this recording around to everybody who registered. So if you need to look back to this at any point, or you just want to remind yourself, or you're starting out and you want to take some of that advice away, you will have a recording of this so you can go back to it at any point. Okie dokie, so I'm going to fire one at each of you here just so we can start to get through these. So the first one, when generating content that appeals to your community, do you ever run out of ideas, or do you sometimes repurpose content? And how do you repurpose content so it appeals to your community? Sophie, we'll pass this one to you.
I always run out of content ideas. After posting every day on LinkedIn and Instagram for a whole year, there's only so many LinkedIn tips one can give. So yeah, always running out of content ideas. So I guess getting over that hump when I am struggling, it would be repurposing old content because, that has worked before, so it will work now. And what I like to do when repurposing is perhaps trying a new angle. So say in the past, I did a post and it was like 5 tips on what to post on LinkedIn. Okay, well, can I share 5 posts on what not to share on LinkedIn, or dive in deeper and consider, okay, well, can I take one of those 5 ideas and zoom in on a certain aspect? So looking at what has worked before has been really helpful for me. And then just asking it, okay, well, where can I dive deeper, or can I do the opposite? I've shared 10 things every cover letter needs. Well, what are 10 things every cover letter shouldn't and do not need? So yeah, always going back to what has worked before. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I think we all repurpose, and it's a really great way to find new ideas that work. So yeah, if you're running out of content ideas, I guarantee you are not alone. I'm right there with you.
Brilliant. Okay, question in from a booking here. How do you balance positive enough to ensure regular engagement over posting? So how do you make sure that you're getting that regular and consistency that you talked about before, Joe, but that you're not over posting and bombarding people with too much?
So it depends on the context of the platform, right? So if you look at social media, for example, then a fraction of your audience at any one time is going to see the messages that you're putting out. So even though it feels like you're posting a lot, if you post every day on LinkedIn, chances are someone will see your messages 3 times a week. So that's the first thing to keep in mind, is not everyone is seeing your things all of the time. There's a slight exception there, which is like if you're doing a lot of email marketing, for example, then an email lands in everyone's inbox every time you send an email. So like there's a definite consideration there. So the first thing I would encourage you to do is take yourself out of your own shoes and look at it through theirs. Beyond that, though, I think there's also a thought, which is, ultimately, if you want to be seen, like, you do have to post a lot, and I actually free yourself from that thought of like, oh, I feel a little bit hesitant to share it, because the reality is that most folks, if they really, really love something, they're going to engage with it. If they really, really hate something, they're going to engage with it. If they're sort of in this grey space in the middle, they're probably not going to bother. They're probably not even going to register it quite as much. I think it's definitely like a relevant and really, really good question. But it's one that you could probably also just like take a little step away from and sort of like give yourself the freedom to sort of think, you know what, we're probably all right. Not everyone's going to see everything at all times. And, that it's more of an us thing than it is necessarily an end consumer thing, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think sometimes there, Joe, to that, it's just not overthinking it, is it? It's not worrying too much about it and just going for it, going with your gut.
Well, if you think it's good, at the end of the day, really, the question is about quantity of content, but really, the big thing that we should be worrying about is the quality. And so, Sophie will know this better than I will, but so often in the social media world, you're targeted on like, let's do 10 posts a day or whatever, or 15 posts a week, whatever it is. And really, that's the wrong way about thinking about it. You're thinking about like, okay, what's the quality thing that I can provide this week? If it's one bit of content that flies, well, that could have you the momentum for the next 2-3 weeks. It really doesn't matter. So I tend to encourage folks to sort of step away from that quantity discussion full stop and sort of think about, okay, what's the one bit of quality that I can put out into the world? And then if you have 7 of those a week, good on you. If you only have 2, then that's fine too.
Brilliant answer. Okay, Sophie, this one's to you. So you're both so friendly and make time for everyone. Do you find it difficult to shut off and get time for yourselves? And any tips around setting boundaries?
Yes, I do struggle. I think it comes with being like a content creator or spending time online, or when you are putting out all the time, how do you fill back up? And like super honestly, it's something I'm really struggling with right now. So I know I mentioned at the beginning, so I work full time, I freelance, I have PLM, and I'm also still a human. So I need time to sleep and eat and do things that refill my tank. So I think for me right now, it's regularly prioritizing myself. So the same way that in a work day, you would schedule in a meeting, like I physically schedule me time into my calendar, so that when it gets to a Monday morning and I look at my week and I'm feeling overwhelmed because I've taken on too much and I probably need to have a conversation with myself about this, I can physically see my week and know, okay, Monday evening, I've got time to watch a movie, or Tuesday evening, I've set aside time to have a FaceTime with my best friends. I need to visualize things. So I have about 8 different notebooks and to-do lists because I physically need to see things, because if I don't, I will struggle. So I guess on a practical level, doing exactly that, physically making time for yourself and making it non-negotiable. I don't care if you need a meeting with me after 6 o'clock, because that is my me time and I am setting that strict boundary. And that's really scary, especially as a graduate, saying no when, like a work client calls and wants to chat at 7 p.m. It takes a lot of guts to say no, but I think you will thank yourself for prioritizing yourself. And then I guess on the other side of how we fill ourselves back up is just finding things that fill your tank. For others, it might be, sitting by the window reading a book. For me, it's playing like really weird and geeky games on the PlayStation, or going on TikTok for a few hours and just having a fun time. So understanding, okay, what do I enjoy and what helps me relax, and doing that regularly is really important. But yeah, super honest, a real struggle, something I'm definitely learning right now. So yeah, not alone in those struggles.
Yeah, and it's funny, isn't it? Because it sounds like the simplest thing to do, to say no and have a cutoff and stick to it, but it is genuinely something I have found the hardest thing in my entire career. So yeah, I think we all have that struggle. Joe, just a second question around boundaries here, which we'll ask you. Where do you draw the line and stop when people ask a lot from your energy?
I think it's Sophie gave a really great answer, and it is hard. I think it's one of those things that you learn about over the course of time, and I'm probably speak a far better game than I actually put into practice. So the game that I like to speak is that, exactly as Sophie said, you separate your time, and come 5 o'clock, then game's over, and you sit back and relax. The reality is I've got to put my phone in a Tupperware box in the evenings to stop me touching it, because that's what I'll do. Otherwise, I'll be on an endless cycle of LinkedIn, email, Twitter, Instagram, and then start the cycle again. So the reality is that it's really, really hard. But the reality is, you got to find these things that matter more in a way, and it's not matter more in totality, but matter more in those moments, or indeed just matter more. So, for example, my daughter was born 5 months ago. She matters more than anything I will ever do. And therefore, being sat servicing someone's random question 5:30 on a Friday is not as going to be as important as helping my daughter out, or playing with her or giving her attention. So having a conscious switch, which is, what, this is important. I need to be here for this moment. I need to be present, is so vital, and you can help people, but you know what, you can probably help them tomorrow, or you can probably help them in a week, and with that thought in mind, nothing is never as urgent as you think. I remember coming out of university and being a graduate and sending emails at 1 o'clock in the morning because I thought they needed a response like that. They never do. If stuff's urgent, people will give you a ring, and that's the reality of it. So I think there's a forgiveness that we need to allow ourselves as people who care about other people to sort of say, you know what, it's okay. I'm just going to chill out a bit, and I'm going to recharge, and I'm going to look after myself, because then I can turn up for other people too. And there's no shame in that. So yeah, very similar answer to Sophie, but maybe a slightly different twist on it as well.
It's good to hear you're both kind of focused on that and practicing that most of the time, at least anyway. So Sophie, we've got a really interesting question here from Callum, which is that he is a member of both communities, which is great to hear. One thing that he's noticed is that yours is predominantly female, Sophie. do you find it hard attracting males, or is it that your target audience is female and you're purposely going after females?
So when I started PLM, I never expected it to grow in any sense. Maybe my uni friends would drop me a follow just to be polite, but I never had big dreams or big plans. So when I started my brand, I wanted it to be something I love. And another thing that I love, aside from marketing, is the color pink. Everything in my bathroom is pink. If I didn't live with my boyfriend, my entire house would be pink. So that love kind of just dived into what I do. And when I created my branding, of course, it had to be bright pink and red. And I never really considered my actual demographic and how gender inclusive that was. But despite the pink, visage, my audience is about 75-25, so 75 being female, 25 being male. But my aim is never to help just males or females. I hope that, the body and the text of what I do and the personality that goes into it just attracts people. PLM was never and is never something that I do very strategically. So I don't sit down and consider my buyer personas, or I don't sit down and look at my insights and demographics, because again, I just do it because I love it. So I guess in a sense, yes, it would be trickier for me to attract a male demographic because, psychologically, women, I suppose, are more attracted to that color pink when we look at color psychology and dive into those sort of aspects of marketing. But I guess it goes back to my goals and my aims and objectives. I don't care who I'm attracting as long as I'm helping someone. But yeah, if you are looking to start and you do want to attract a specific demographic, then color psychology and your branding is definitely something to consider. But for me, just like pink.
I love it. I love it. I love pink too. So, okay, question from Martin here. So I joined a startup with a small following, and the consumer base isn't particularly tech savvy. What's the best way to get the ball rolling, Joe?
It's a big question, right? That's not just a communities question. That feels like a marketing question in general. So, would you like me to tackle it as a communities question or a marketing question, Lisa? What's best for you?
Let's go with the marketing answer to that, because I think you're right. I think that's definitely, he's talking about the customer base isn't particularly tech savvy. So I think it's reaching and probably growing and engaging with that customer base. So it's maybe a mix of both there.
Okay, sure. So in this case, then, there's a few models that you can follow. I mean, so the first would be Mark Ritson's diagnosis, strategy, and tactics. To speak briefly about these three stages. At the diagnosis stage, you're going to be looking to understand those customers. So you've got a great starting point there. You're saying that the customer base isn't particularly tech savvy. I'd be spending a lot of time interviewing those folks. I'd be scheduling as many interviews as you can over the next few weeks. I'd be asking them the questions. How specifically aren't you tech savvy? What problems do you have when you're trying to pick up our software or tech? What can we do to make the experience better? What were you thinking about before you bought the product? What were you thinking about before you bought the competitor? Really looking to deep dive on these individuals. That's your starting point, because you'll get the ideas of the content, the messaging, the target market, and indeed the tactics that you need to be implementing from these folks. Everything will sort of fall out of this very, very top stage, which is called diagnosis. At the strategic point, let's take some time and sort of define the messaging really, really strongly. I really like to have like 3 key messages that are going to suit these people. So you spent a moment to say, you know what? I know who you are now. I know your problems. I know how I can help you. So let's put together 3 messages that are going to really suit this audience and define who those people are. I mean, so, in the context of this conversation about communities, Sophie's just given a great answer. I do it because I love it. In the context of a marketing discussion, it is worth writing down who are the people that I'm going to be helping, and not just who they are, but how they think. That question about what was the thing you were doing before you bought that from us is really, really important. That would be the thing that sort of finds out what gets in their head. And then finally, at the tactics stage, this is the bit that everyone jumps to. So I wouldn't be surprised if there's a question here, which is the question was phrased in do I need to go on social media? Do I need to go on email and stuff like that? The answer is you don't jump to any of those things before you've got a clear idea of who you're helping, how you're going to help them, the messages, and then you can figure out stuff like social media, etc., etc., etc. But the answer is that there's never one answer. It's entirely dependent on your context, and until you know the context that your customers are operating in, then you don't know what your answer is going to be. So that's how I'd approach it. There's an excellent talk by Mark Ritson called On the Contrary that is worth Googling. And that will hopefully give some structure to your thinking and sort of able you to get the ball rolling on the rest of it.
Yeah, and I guess just to jump in there on my obsession in life, but buyer personas in this particular instance will really, really help you with that. So, really figuring out your buyer personas, who they are, what makes them tick, understanding how they need to be spoken to, what technology they're using, and what level of comfortableness they've got with each of those will really help you understand how to move those over. So, all right, we've got 2 minutes left. Last question, because everybody wants to know the answer to this, Jo. How did you get Sean Paul on board?
I have no idea if I was violating the terms of service, but it was just a Cameo. It was so cameo.com. I think it was $80, and it was the best $80 I've ever spent. So
Well, guys, you've been absolutely amazing. Thank you so much. I mean, there's so much that everybody, I'm sure, has taken away from that. If you guys haven't seen the Marketing Meetup or Pretty Little Marketers, you can find them over all social platforms. Sign up to Jo's newsletter and get stuck into those webinars. They are one of the best marketing tools out there. And just thank you, guys. It's been really cool to have you both on and to get, both opinions. Although they were very, very similar, both really useful in terms of advice and sharing.
Thank you for having us. It was a thrill to be involved. So appreciate it, and thank you for the great questions as well.
You're welcome. Excellent. Take care, and if anybody wants to reach out on socials, do. We are all here and around and happy to help you in any way we can. Have a great Friday, guys. Enjoy the match on Sunday. I'm sure we're all rooting for exactly the same result. So yeah, and we'll catch you in 2 weeks' time for our next webinar in the Level Up series. Take care, guys. Bye.